hier eine Antwort zu geben auf die Debatte.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I will take the chance, as I spent a lot of time in the opening of our debate, now to comment on some of the relevant, very relevant issues that were raised and one more general remarks. One on defence spending. I think those that raised it are perfectly right. There is not only the target of those member states that are belonging to NATO of the 2% of the GDP, there is the fact that 12 member states have already or are planning currently to increase the defence spending, but there is not only the need to focus on how much we spend, and I think this was very well raised by many of you. The real point, the other real point, is how we spend, and if we manage to spend together in a coordinated way, and how will we manage to spend better the money we invest in defence, which means looking at the output of our investments in defence. I think this is obviously very much a national debate, but there are components of this debate which are Europeans, and especially when we look at incentives on defence spending, there is work on the way, especially in view of the June Council. Many of you raised the issue of EU-NATO cooperation, and some of you raised it with the need to strengthen the relations or the coordination. Let me say that this is done already in a very fruitful way, and that there is no risk, I see no risk in this historical time, that increasing our own defence and security policy can in any way be of detriment of NATO. On the contrary, we have a complementarity on which we can work even more, especially when we tackle the hybrid threats. Strategic communication was mentioned. There are a variety of tools on which putting together different elements of our work can be extremely helpful for both, keeping the fact that we are completely different in nature, as I said several times, and that we have different decision making and obviously agendas in many issues, but still the strong cooperation is not only a need for the future, it is also already a reality. I do not see the danger of duplication that someone mentioned. I see rather the need to fill the gaps we have in common. This is a problem the European Union has, but also NATO has. One punctual question was raised by Mr. Plenković about the possible Csdp operation in Ukraine. Let me say that we discussed this at length inside the European Union with the Member States, obviously with the Ukrainian authorities. We are already having a mission in Ukraine, a civilian mission assisting with the reform of the security sector. We are ready to increase that kind of support, which is, as I said, a civilian work, a non-executive mission on the security sector reform, and we will continue to channel our support for the full implementation of the Minsk Agreement through the OSCE. We commonly believe that this is the way we have to follow, in full support of the efforts that, especially in the Normandy format, are continuing to be done. Let me close with the general remarks. Many of you in this room, and I mention the ones in good faith and with no purely domestic audience purposes, many of you refer to the need to move on, go beyond the mere declarations, have concrete steps, and some used the right reference to the fact that after the Lisbon Treaty not all the instruments that are in the Lisbon Treaty are used, and that the security situation requires that. And I have been the first one, I think on 6 October in my hearing in front of AFET, to be mentioning this. This is, to me, one of the challenges of my mandate in these 5 years, to make full use of the instruments of the Lisbon Treaty. And this requires hard work to create the political conditions for doing that. But let me also say that when we, in this room or outside of this room, translate this, which is the right highlighting still gaps, still limits in our action, that I'm the first to recognise. When we move this to the point of saying that Europe doesn't have a policy, that Europe is divided, that Europe is not acting, that Europe is not Europe, as someone said in this room, I understand that this is a narrative we are used to, but sometimes this doesn't reflect reality. I said in my opening, we're talking today on CSDP as yesterday at 28 united in less than 1 month took the decision to establish an operation. The two things, the narrative and the reality of these days, are not matching. So this means, obviously, that doesn't mean that we have solved all the limits that we still have in our CSDP, not at all. But to me, the most concrete way of having a real CSDP, a real common security and defence policy, is concretely using the instruments we have, is concretely building the political conditions for having decisions in the Council and having the operations and the missions we need when we need them, in the way we need them. This is a work that we have to do together because, again, Europe is not an abstract entity existing somewhere. Europe is what we make of it, all of us, the Member States, the European Parliament. Each of you has a political family, has a political party, has a Member State of nationality, and we have a common responsibility in building the political conditions for making full use of all the instruments we have and of recognising when we have steps that are going in that positive direction, to say this is a step, take responsibility and move forward in creating the difficult work of realising what the European dream but also need is about, which means consistency, a lot of it. I will not go back to many of the details that I discussed in the opening, especially about the last decisions we have taken, if not for one point. Pablo Iglesias mentioned the need for all our missions and operations to fulfil the requirements of international law. That for me is the basic starting point, that for me is natural, and for me the reference to the international law means obviously the full respect and the full work in the framework of the United Nations. That's why we are developing so strongly the cooperation with the UN and with the UN system, in particular in this case when we talk about the situation in the Mediterranean, the work with the UNHCR. This is the basis for our work because these were the principles, the values on which Europe was based, and these are the principles and values that have to be at the basis of the European Union missions and operations around the world. Thank you.
Danke sehr, Frau Mogherini. Und nun sind noch einmal die Berichterstatterinnen und Berichterstatter an Bord. Der erste ist Herr Arnaud Danjean für 2 Minuten.
Merci Madame la Présidente. Madame la Haute Représentante, permettez-moi de vous dire que les mots que vous venez de prononcer sur l'aspect concret de ce qui doit nous inspirer sont parfaitement en phase avec la philosophie du rapport que j'ai présenté et que mes collègues, je les en remercie, ont bien voulu enrichir de leur contribution. Je crois que le débat l'a globalement bien montré aujourd'hui à travers l'accueil positif qui a été réservé. La question à laquelle nous devons répondre aujourd'hui, c'est comment faire mieux en commun par rapport à des défis de sécurité qui sont d'une ampleur inédite et d'une complexité inédite. Et permettez-moi de vous dire que ceux d'entre nous, des collègues qui sont intervenus sur un mode très idéologique, avec des postures parfois totalement dénuées de réalité par rapport à ce qui figure dans ce rapport, ces collègues se trompent. À ceux qui redoutent ou à ceux qui espèrent une armée européenne, par exemple, il en a été question aujourd'hui, je dis qu'ils se trompent de sujet, qu'ils se trompent de débat, que ce n'est pas le but de ce rapport et de cette discussion, ni même du Conseil qui aura lieu au mois de juin. Le but, c'est de savoir comment, à 28, nous pouvons collectivement faire face à des défis, parce que ces défis, aucun État membre seul ne peut y faire face. C'est aussi simple que ça. Et les réponses, elles sont effectivement dans le traité. D'abord dans le traité. J'apprécie le fait que vous utilisiez votre influence institutionnelle et politique pour pousser cette philosophie, qui est une philosophie pragmatique de flexibilité. C'est ce dont nous avons besoin aujourd'hui. Nous ne pourrons peut-être pas tout faire à 28, nous ne devons d'ailleurs peut-être pas tout faire à 28 en matière de sécurité et de défense, parce que la réalité en Europe est hétérogène. Mais nous devons permettre à 28, politiquement, à ceux qui veulent faire plus et aller plus loin en matière d'intégration de la politique de défense, de pouvoir le faire. Et je pense que les pistes que vous proposez, les pistes que nous proposons sont tout à fait compatibles, complémentaires et vont dans la même direction. J'espère qu'elles seront entendues par les États membres.
Danke, Herr Danjean. Da Herr Edward Kukan jetzt nicht hier sein kann, ist der nächste Redner dann Herr Indrek Tarand, ebenfalls für 2 Minuten.
Thank you. In the beginning, I was speaking in a capacity of a rapporteur, but now I would like to draw your attention to some points which my group thinks, the Green Group. And we have some problems, which is reducing money from Horizon 2020 seems not so good plan for us. Secondly, the EU budget to compensate for European defence companies who cannot export their production due to sanctions and embargoes against third countries is not a good idea to support them. And finally, the idea of value-added tax reductions, exceptions for defence capability cooperation. So you will see, we will have a very interesting vote tomorrow. And therefore, I urge everyone in this chamber to look at the big picture, forget about dogmas and vested interests, and if possible, colleagues, please share a big picture proposed by a modest MEP who comes from a very small country, which airspace is from time to time policed by Italian Air Force. A country do share a picture or vision that EU common defence is a must, not a nuisance, and it will bring us more together than we can ever imagine. Thank you.
Vielen Dank. Und die letzte Rednerin ist nun Frau Anna Gomes, ebenfalls für 2 Minuten.
Thank you, High Representative Mogherini, for your substantive comments on our reports, and mine in particular on the Defence Markets Directive's implementation. I would only urge you to actually ensure strategic direction also on the College of Commission in implementing these directives, in order to avoid totally contradictory decisions, for instance, like Commissioner Verheugen recently, on the implementation of these directives, enabling, for instance, a country like mine, Portugal, to go on with the dismantling of crucial Portuguese shipyards that were producing for our navy, and then rubber stamping that in a very thwarted interpretation of the directives. Or also in allowing or giving the amen of the Commission to the selling of critical defence technology companies, or even critical infrastructures such as the port of Piraeus, to companies controlled by other foreign powers, namely China. We in this Parliament definitely support you also, your endeavours to push the Member States to deliver on the common financing of Csdp missions, namely military missions, because this is not just about allowing a fairer burden sharing, it's about the only way to encourage the generation of forces. Equally important is to overcome the bureaucratic and political barriers which prevent cooperation between Member States and the Union, and even among EU specialised agencies, to ensure a more synergetic use for civilian and military CSDP operations of the existing capacities. Do you know, High Representative, that the European Maritime Safety Agency based in Lisbon is actually providing very crucial information for the Atalanta mission, as it could do as well for the Mediterranean mission,
And they don't have a mandate for that. Isn't this stupid? Shouldn't we actually acknowledge and actually make full potential of that contribution? Ultimately, I just want to make your point. Indeed, we need more defence, more Europe of defence, because facing with the challenges we have, no single country, no single member state can do it alone.
Danke. Die gemeinsame Aussprache ist damit geschlossen. Die Abstimmung findet am Donnerstag statt. Und für die Debatte zur Lage in Ungarn wird nun Herr Präsident Schulz den Vorsitz übernehmen.